There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the familiar world begins to dissolve at its edges, when the solid ground of who we thought we were starts to shift beneath our feet like sand disturbed by an incoming tide. This is the threshold, not a doorway we choose to cross, but a boundary that crosses us, marking us with its invisible seal as we stand bewildered in the gathering dusk of transformation. You have felt it, haven't you? That strange sensation of being neither here nor there, suspended between two worlds like a dreamer, caught in the liminal space between sleep and waking. The old certainties that once anchored your identity now feel as fragile as autumn leaves, beautiful but brittle, ready to crumble at the slightest touch. Yet something new stirs in the depths, formless, nameless, but undeniably alive with possibility. This is sacred solitude, and it is not what the world calls loneliness. Loneliness is the cry of the ego when it finds itself separated from its sources of external validation, when the familiar mirrors of recognition are suddenly turned to face the wall. But sacred solitude, this is the soul's deliberate retreat into the chrysalis of its own becoming, a willing descent into the fertile darkness where all true transformation begins. Jung spoke of this threshold as the place where the persona begins its necessary dissolution. The persona, that carefully constructed mask we wear to navigate the social world, starts to feel foreign against our skin, like clothing that belonged to someone else, someone we used to be but can no longer remember being. The roles we have played so convincingly begin to feel like elaborate costumes in a play whose script we have forgotten, whose meaning has drained away like water from a broken vessel. In this twilight space, you may find yourself standing before the mirror of your own reflection and seeing a stranger's eyes looking back at you. Not the stranger of madness, but the stranger of truth, the one who has been waiting patiently beneath the surface of your constructed self, the one who knows your real name, the one who remembers what you came here to become before the world convinced you to become something else instead. The Hermit of the Tarot carries a lantern through the darkness, but the light he bears is not borrowed from the sun or stolen from the stars. It is the light of his own inner flame, kindled through years of patient solitude, fed by the sacred fuel of authentic seeking. This is the lamp you must learn to carry, not the flashlight of borrowed wisdom or the spotlight of others' expectations, but the gentle, steady glow of your own awakening consciousness. And oh, how frightening this threshold can be. The ego recoils from it like a child afraid of the dark, for it senses what Jung called the death that precedes rebirth, not the death of the body, but something far more profound, the death of false identity, the death of who we pretended to be to survive in a world that often punishes authenticity. The ego mourns this death because it cannot yet see the resurrection that waits on the other side of surrender. This sacred solitude asks everything of you and promises nothing that the world would recognize as reward. It offers no applause, no recognition, no external validation for the courage it takes to step into the unknown country of your own soul. Instead, it whispers an ancient invitation in a language older than words. Come and die to who you think you are, so that who you truly are can finally be born. The cocoon of consciousness that forms around you during this threshold time may feel like imprisonment, but it is the most necessary sanctuary your soul will ever know. Within its protective walls, the old structures of identity can safely dissolve while the new patterns of selfhood slowly take shape. Like the caterpillar that must completely liquefy before it can become the butterfly, you must be willing to release your grip on the solid form of your former self. There is a profound intelligence at work in this process, and wisdom that operates beneath the level of conscious understanding. Your psyche knows exactly what it is doing, even when your mind feels lost in confusion. The unconscious has been preparing for this moment of sacred solitude for years, perhaps lifetimes, gathering the materials needed for your reconstruction, composing the symphony of your becoming in frequencies too deep for ordinary hearing. Trust this process, even when, especially when, it makes no sense to the rational mind. The logical self will want to fix, to hurry, to control the unfolding, but sacred solitude asks for something far more difficult: the courage to simply be present with the mystery of your own transformation, to sit in the not knowing like a monk in meditation, to make friends with uncertainty like a mystic embracing the dark night of the soul. This threshold you stand upon is holy ground. Every soul that has ever awakened to its true nature has crossed this same invisible bridge between who they were and who they were meant to become. You are not alone in your aloneness. You are part of an ancient lineage of seekers who understood that sometimes we must leave the village of collective consciousness to find the hermit's cave of individual truth. The lamp you carry into this sacred darkness is not just for your own illumination. It is being kindled for all those who will follow, all those who will one day find themselves standing at their own threshold, wondering if they have the courage to step into the unknown. Your willingness to embrace this sacred solitude becomes a light in the darkness for every soul still searching for the courage to begin their own journey home to themselves. And so you stand here now at the threshold of sacred solitude, feeling the old world crumble behind you and the new world waiting like a question mark against the sky. Take the lamp, light the flame, step forward into the blessed darkness of your own becoming. The chrysalis is calling, and your soul knows the way. The first betrayal comes not from others, but from your own mouth. Words that once flowed like rivers now stumble over themselves, catching on the rocks of unspoken truth. You find yourself in conversations that feel like walking through thick fog. You can see the shapes of familiar topics moving around you, but they seem distant, muffled, somehow less real than the silence growing inside your chest. It begins subtly, this strange estrangement from the language of your former life. A colleague asks about your weekend plans, and the words you would have automatically spoken about movies, dinners, the comfortable rituals of social connection hover just beyond your reach, like birds that refuse to land, not because you cannot speak them, but because they no longer carry the weight of truth. They have become hollow shells, beautiful perhaps, but empty of the substance your soul now craves. You sit in coffee shops where laughter bubbles around you like champagne, but the sound reaches your ears as if from underwater. The conversations that once engaged you, the endless analysis of other people's choices, the comfortable complaints about weather and work, the safe territories of shared opinions, now feel like a language you are slowly forgetting how to speak. Not from any judgment of others, but from some deep shift in your own frequency, as if you are a radio slowly being tuned to a different station. This is Enantiodromia in its most intimate form, Jung's principle of psychological reversal revealing itself in the simple act of human connection. What once nourished now starves. What once engaged now exhausts. The extroverted persona that learned to find itself in the mirrors of other people's responses begins its slow withdrawal, like a tide that has reached its highest point and must now inevitably recede. Friends notice first, though they cannot name what they notice. "You're quiet tonight," they say, and you nod because it is true, but you cannot explain that the quietness is not absence, but presence. The presence of something unnamed stirring in the depths, demanding attention that small talk cannot capture. You are not becoming antisocial. you are becoming discriminating in ways that have nothing to do with judgment and everything to do with authenticity. The casual cruelties that you once participated in, the gentle gossip, the shared eye rolls, the bonding through criticism, now feel like wearing shoes that are too small. Your soul has grown, imperceptibly but undeniably, and the old containers of connection no longer fit. You find yourself defending people you might once have dismissed, seeing complexity where you once saw simple categories, feeling compassion where you once felt comfortable superiority. In group settings, you become an observer of your own performance. You watch yourself nod at appropriate moments, laugh when laughter is expected, contribute observations that you know will land safely in the collective understanding. But there is a growing distance between the performer and the performance, like an actor who suddenly becomes aware of being on stage and can no longer lose themselves in the role. The topics that capture your imagination now, the questions about meaning, the mysteries of consciousness, the strange synchronicities that seem to follow periods of deep solitude, these feel too precious, too fragile to bring into casual conversation. They are like seeds that need specific conditions to grow, and the bright, fluorescent light of social chatter feels too harsh for their tender emergence. Jung understood this as the natural process of individuation asserting itself against the gravitational pull of collective consciousness. The psyche begins to differentiate itself, to discover its own unique frequency, rather than simply harmonizing with the collective tune. This is not rebellion, but evolution, the soul's gradual recognition that it has outgrown the clothes of its former identity. You may find yourself saying yes to invitations while feeling an inexplicable heaviness, or declining with apologies that feel necessary but insufficient. How do you explain that you are not avoiding people, but seeking something deeper than what most social encounters offer? How do you express that your capacity for surface connection has been mysteriously depleted while your hunger for authentic exchange has grown almost unbearable? The words that once came so easily, the automatic responses, the conversational reflexes, the comfortable phrases that kept interactions smooth, begin to feel like stones in your mouth. Not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer true for you. Your truth has shifted to a frequency that casual conversation cannot reach, and you find yourself increasingly unable to pretend otherwise. This is the sacred death of the social self, the necessary composting of old patterns of connection to make room for something more authentic to grow. The persona is beginning its dissolution, and though this feels like loss, it is actually liberation, the liberation from the exhausting performance of being someone you are no longer sure you ever truly were. In quiet moments, you might remember conversations from years past and realize that you were performing even then, unconsciously shaping yourself to fit the expectations of each interaction. The revelation is both freeing and disorienting. If you were performing then, who is this one who now refuses to perform? Who is this presence that insists on truth even when truth makes conversation awkward? The ash taste in your mouth is not the bitterness of cynicism, but the residue of burned bridges. Bridges you must burn to prevent yourself from retreating into the comfortable country of your former self. Each small betrayal of your old conversational patterns is actually a fidelity to something deeper, something that has no name yet, but knows its own truth with crystalline clarity. This is the beginning of sacred solitude, not the absence of others, but the presence of yourself in a way that makes superficial connection impossible. The conversations that once sustained you turn to ash not because they are worthless, but because you have become too valuable to spend your essence on anything less than authentic exchange. And so the words dry up, the easy connections become difficult, and you find yourself standing at the edge of a great silence holding the truth of who you are becoming like a flame too precious to expose to the wind of casual chatter. The cruelest awakening comes not from strangers, but from those whose faces you know by heart, whose voices once felt like home, whose presence once promised sanctuary from the world's sharp edges. Now you sit across from them, your family, your oldest friends, your chosen tribe, and feel the terrible distance that no amount of physical closeness can bridge. They speak, and their words reach you as if traveling across vast canyons of misunderstanding, each syllable echoing with the hollow sound of a language you are forgetting how to hear. It is not that they have changed, though your awakening mind may try to convince you that they have. They remain exactly who they have always been, loyal to the same concerns, animated by the same fears, comforted by the same illusions that once comforted you. But you have become a foreigner in the country of your own history, an exile from the shared mythology that once bound you together in the warm conspiracy of mutual recognition. Listen to them speak of their days, their plans, their worries about mortgages and promotions, and whether their children will get into the right schools. Watch how their eyes light up when discussing the latest scandal, the newest acquisition, the endless drama of who said what to whom and why it matters. Notice how their concerns, which once felt urgent and real and worthy of your emotional investment, now seem to you like the elaborate games children play with invisible tea sets, charming in their earnestness, but ultimately occurring in a world you no longer quite inhabit. This is the mirror of misunderstanding that Jung knew every individuating soul must face. Your loved ones become unwitting reflectors of who you used to be, and in their familiar patterns, you see the ghost of your former self. They speak the language of the collective unconscious, the shared assumptions, the unquestioned values, the comfortable certainties that bind communities together, while you find yourself gradually learning a different tongue, one that has no words for the experiences now moving through you like underground rivers. The tragedy is not that they cannot understand you. The tragedy is that you are beginning to understand them in a way that makes continuing the old charade of connection nearly impossible. You see, through their personas to the frightened children beneath, playing elaborate games of significance to avoid the void that you have learned to befriend. You witness their desperate attempts to construct meaning from the materials of status and acquisition and approval, and your heart breaks not with judgment, but with recognition of your own former desperation. They may sense this shift in you and respond with the ancient human fear of abandonment. You've changed, they say, and the words carry an undertone of accusation, as if change were a betrayal of the unspoken contract you once shared. They may try harder to engage you in the old patterns, the familiar complaints, the shared enemies, the comfortable rituals of connection that once made you all feel less alone in an uncertain world. But you find yourself unable to fully participate in their reality while simultaneously unable to share your own. How do you explain that their problems, while real, feel to you like rearranging furniture in a house that is already on fire? How do you express that their solutions feel like applying band-aids to wounds that require surgery of the soul? How do you convey that you have glimpsed something beyond the horizon of their current concerns without sounding like you believe yourself superior? The individuation process is ruthless in its demand for authenticity. It will not allow you to pretend that their world is still your world, even for the sake of peace. It insists that you speak from the truth of your current experience, even when that truth creates distance where there once was closeness. This is not cruelty but integrity, the integrity of a soul that has begun to know itself and can no longer participate in the collective sleep. You may find yourself sitting at family dinners feeling like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, fascinated but fundamentally outside the circle of shared assumptions. Their jokes no longer make you laugh, not because they are not funny, but because the worldview that makes them funny is one you are slowly outgrowing. Their concerns no longer grip you, not because you lack compassion, but because you have glimpsed the larger context in which all earthly concerns arise and dissolve like waves on an infinite ocean. This is perhaps the loneliest phase of awakening, the period when you are no longer who you were, but not yet fully who you are becoming. You stand in the space between worlds, fluent in neither language, belonging fully to neither reality. Your loved ones may experience your withdrawal as rejection, when in truth it is protection. Protection for the fragile new awareness growing within you, protection for their right to remain where they are, protection for the delicate process of your own becoming. Jung called this the necessary separation that precedes authentic reunion, for you cannot truly love others until you have found the courage to be who you really are, and you cannot be who you really are while still clinging to the false comfort of collective identification. The mirror of misunderstanding is actually a gift. Though it feels like punishment, it shows you exactly how far you have traveled from the shore of your former self. The mountain peaks of their priorities seem distant now, not because you have moved away from them, but because you have climbed to a different altitude. From where you stand now, you can see the valley where they dwell with tenderness and clarity, but you cannot pretend to still be living there yourself. You have become a citizen of a different country, the country of questions rather than answers, of mystery rather than certainty, of solitude rather than the comfort of shared illusions. And in this recognition, the sacred loneliness begins to reveal its deeper purpose. You are not abandoning those you love. You are preparing to love them more truly than ever before, with the freedom that comes only from knowing who you are. Something invisible has taken hold of you, something that pulls with the persistence of gravity and the inevitability of seasons changing. You feel it in your bones first. This strange magnetic force that draws you away from the bright lights of social gathering and toward the darker territories of your own inner landscape. It is not a conscious choice, this turning inward, but something deeper and more primal, like a salmon responding to the ancient call to swim upstream, or a bird feeling the first stirrings of migration in its hollow bones. You notice it first in small rebellions against your own social calendar. Invitations that would have once excited you now feel like obligations wearing the mask of pleasure. The prospect of another dinner party, another networking event, another gathering where you must assemble the fragments of your public self into a coherent performance. These begin to weigh on you like stones in your pockets, each one making it harder to move through the world with the lightness you once knew. The theater of social interaction reveals itself to you now with uncomfortable clarity. You watch yourself at gatherings, observing from some strange internal distance as you play the roles that others expect. The interested listener, the witty contributor, the reliable friend who shows up with the right energy and the appropriate responses. But there is a growing chasm between the performer and the performance, and you find yourself increasingly unable to lose yourself in the act. Jung understood this gravitational pull as the psyche's natural movement toward balance. If you have spent years, perhaps decades, oriented primarily toward the external world, finding your identity in relationships, achievements, social roles, then the unconscious will eventually assert its claim on your attention with undeniable force. This is not pathology but psychology, not withdrawal but recalibration, not antisocial behavior but the soul's insistence on equal time in the court of consciousness. The magnetic pull of solitude grows stronger as the weeks pass, like a tide that rises incrementally but inexorably. You find excuses to stay home that feel more authentic than the reasons you once gave for going out. The idea of spending an evening alone with your thoughts becomes more appealing than the brightest social invitation. You discover that you prefer the company of books to the chatter of familiar voices, the silence of empty rooms to the noise of full ones. Your loved ones may interpret this withdrawal as depression or antisocial behavior, and their concern may feel both touching and impossible to explain. How do you tell them that you are not moving away from life, but toward it? How do you express that this gravitational pull toward solitude feels not like escape, but like coming home to a part of yourself you never knew existed? How do you convey that what they experience as absence is actually the most profound presence you have ever felt? The magnetic force pulls you deeper into territories that have no names in the language of everyday conversation. You find yourself fascinated by questions that have no practical application, drawn to experiences that offer no social utility. The mystery of consciousness becomes more compelling than the mechanics of career advancement. The exploration of your own inner landscape feels more urgent than the navigation of external relationships. In quiet moments, and there are more quiet moments now, you sense the vast depths beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. It is as if you have lived your entire life, skating on the thin ice of consensus reality, and now that ice is beginning to crack, revealing the dark waters of the unconscious flowing beneath. The pull you feel is the call of those depths, inviting you to dive beneath the surface of your carefully constructed identity to discover what lies in the mysterious territories below. This is the nigredo that alchemists wrote about, the necessary blackening, the descent into the dark phases of transformation, where the old must decompose before the new can emerge. The gravitational pull you feel is not toward emptiness, but toward fullness, not toward nothing, but toward everything you have never allowed yourself to explore. It is the soul's insistence that you have spent enough time in the shallows and must now learn to breathe in deeper waters. You may find yourself canceling plans with increasing frequency, choosing the sanctuary of solitude over the stimulation of social engagement. Each choice feels both like a small betrayal of your former self and a profound act of fidelity to something emerging within you. The magnetic pull becomes so strong that resisting it feels like swimming against a current too powerful to fight, exhausting and ultimately futile. In the theater of your own mind, you become both audience and performer, watching the drama of your thoughts unfold without feeling compelled to edit or direct. The internal conversation that you once kept as background noise now demands center stage. The voice of your deepest self, long drowned out by the noise of external demands and social expectations, begins to speak in whispers that gradually grow stronger, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. This gravitational pull toward solitude is preparing you for something that cannot happen in the bright lights of social performance. It is creating the conditions necessary for a kind of inner alchemy that requires darkness, silence, and the fertile emptiness that can only be found when you stop filling every moment with the presence of others. The unconscious is calling you into its depths, not to drown you, but to baptize you, not to isolate you, but to introduce you to the part of yourself that has been waiting patiently for this moment of recognition. And so you yield to the pull, perhaps reluctantly at first, then with growing acceptance, and finally with something approaching gratitude. You allow yourself to be drawn into the magnetic field of your own becoming, trusting that this force that feels so much larger than your conscious will know something about your destiny that your rational mind has not yet comprehended. The tide is rising, and you are learning to swim in waters deeper than you ever imagined possible. The betrayal is complete when the very activities that once filled your cup now drain it, when the pleasures that sustained your former self become the hollow rituals of a stranger's life. You sit in the movie theater where you once escaped into other worlds, and the flickering images on the screen feel like shadows on a cave wall, empty projections that no longer hold the power to transport you beyond the boundaries of your own restless questioning. The stories that once moved you to tears now feel like elaborate distractions from the only story that matters, the one unfolding in the secret chambers of your own awakening consciousness. This is perhaps the most disorienting phase of the lonely awakening, when the scaffolding of pleasure that held your former life together begins to collapse beneath the weight of your evolving consciousness. The weekend rituals that once punctuated your weeks with anticipated joy now feel like costumes you must wear to maintain the fiction of being who you used to be. The restaurants where you once found comfort now serve food that tastes like cardboard in your mouth. The music that once stirred your soul now sounds like noise, generated by machines for the consumption of people you no longer recognize as your tribe. Jung would recognize this as the natural death of the ego structure that has outgrown its usefulness. The persona that once found meaning and identity through specific forms of consumption and entertainment discovers that those forms no longer fit the expanding dimensions of who you are becoming. It is not that these pleasures have become bad or wrong. They simply no longer speak the language that your soul has learned to understand. You may find yourself standing in bookstores, running your fingers along spines of novels that once transported you to magical realms, only to discover that fiction feels insufficient to contain the mystery you are living. The carefully crafted stories of other people's imagination pale beside the raw, unedited narrative of your own psychological transformation. You reach for books about spirituality, psychology, philosophy, anything that might offer a mirror for the nameless experiences moving through you like underground rivers. The television shows that once provided reliable escape now feel like elaborate mechanisms for keeping consciousness asleep. You watch people you once admired going through the motions of dramatic emotion, and you see through their performances to the emptiness beneath. Not because you have become cynical, but because you have become sensitive to the difference between authentic feeling and manufactured response. The laugh tracks sound hollow, the manufactured conflicts feel trivial, and the resolution of problems through external action seems to miss the point of what problems are really about. Even the social rituals that once brought pleasure begin to feel like elaborate pantomimes. The dinner parties where conversation once flowed like wine now feel like carefully choreographed performances where everyone speaks their assigned lines. The celebrations that once marked meaningful passages now seem like collective agreements to ignore the deeper questions that such passages should inspire. You participate, but with the detachment of an anthropologist studying customs you no longer quite understand. This emptying of old pleasures is not a loss, but a clearing, a necessary evacuation of the psychic space that must be emptied before it can be filled with something more authentic. The soul has outgrown its old containers and is preparing to inhabit new ones. But first, there must be a period of sacred emptiness, a holy hunger that cannot be satisfied by the old sources of nourishment. You may panic at first, fearing that you are becoming incapable of joy, worried that some essential capacity for pleasure has been damaged or destroyed. Friends and family may notice your withdrawal from activities you once embraced with enthusiasm, and their concern may feel both touching and impossible to explain. How do you tell them that you are not becoming depressed, but becoming discriminating? How do you express that your capacity for pleasure has not diminished, but transformed, requiring new forms of nourishment that the old world cannot provide? The emptiness you feel is not vacancy, but pregnancy. You are gravid with possibilities that have no names yet, pregnant with pleasures that cannot be purchased or planned or shared in the old ways. The death of your former sources of satisfaction is preparing you for forms of fulfillment that can only emerge from the depths of authentic selfhood. You are learning to derive nourishment from sources that the collective consciousness does not recognize as food. Solitude instead of stimulation, silence instead of entertainment, questions instead of answers. This is the dark night of the ego, when all external sources of meaning reveal themselves as insufficient to feed the hunger of an awakening soul. The old pleasures become not just empty, but actively draining, like trying to satisfy a sophisticated palate with baby food. You may feel guilty about your inability to enjoy what once brought joy, but this guilt is simply the death cry of the old identity that defined itself through its attachments and preferences. In this phase of sacred emptiness, you begin to discover pleasures that belong to you alone, the strange satisfaction of an insight that cannot be explained to others, the mysterious joy of a synchronicity that speaks directly to your soul, the profound contentment that comes from simply being present with your own existence without need for external validation or entertainment. These new forms of nourishment are so subtle, so internal, so independent of external circumstances that they may feel like madness to a world that has forgotten how to feed itself from within. The costumes no longer fit because you have grown beyond their measurements. The old pleasures have become too small to contain the expanding dimensions of your consciousness. And in this recognition lies the first glimpse of liberation, the understanding that you are not losing your capacity for joy, but discovering forms of fulfillment that cannot be taken away by changing circumstances, that cannot be manufactured by others, that belong entirely to the sovereign territory of your own authentic being. The emptiness is not the end, but the beginning, the necessary void that must be entered before new forms of fullness can emerge. The world becomes a place of too much, too bright, too loud, too fast, too sharp against the tender membrane of your newly exposed consciousness. It is as if some protective layer that you never knew existed has been stripped away overnight, leaving you raw and receptive to frequencies that once passed through you unnoticed. Colors seem more vivid but also more aggressive. Sounds carry emotional undertones that make your nervous system recoil. The casual cruelties embedded in everyday conversation land on your awareness like blows against bruised skin. This is not weakness manifesting, but sensitivity awakening, the soul's preparation for deeper forms of perception that require the removal of the psychic calluses that once protected you from feeling too much. Jung understood this heightened sensitivity as a necessary stage in the individuation process, when the boundaries between self and world become more porous, allowing for the kind of direct knowing that bypasses the rational mind's careful filters. You find yourself overwhelmed in spaces that once felt comfortable. The fluorescent lights of office buildings buzz with an intensity that seems to penetrate your skull. The background music in restaurants and stores, designed to be ignored, becomes impossible to tune out, a constant invasion of manufactured emotion that conflicts with the natural rhythms of your inner landscape. The chatter of crowds feels like static electricity crackling across your exposed nerves, each voice a small assault on your need for the silence in which your deeper thoughts can finally be heard. The sacred wound of sensitivity reveals itself most clearly in your relationships with others. You begin to notice the emotional undercurrents that flow beneath every interaction, the fear behind the anger, the sadness beneath the criticism, the desperate longing that masquerades as casual conversation. What once seemed like simple social exchange now appears as a complex symphony of hidden needs and unspoken truths, and you find yourself involuntarily absorbing the emotional states of everyone around you like a tuning fork that vibrates in response to frequencies others cannot hear. This hypervigilance is not paranoia, but prophecy. Your psyche developing the sensitivity necessary to navigate the subtle realms that most people cannot perceive. You become aware of the energy that people carry into rooms, the weight of their unprocessed grief, the brightness of their suppressed joy, the shadow they cast even in full sunlight. This awareness is both gift and burden, offering profound insight into the human condition while making ordinary social interaction feel like walking through a minefield of others' unconscious emotional debris. The modern world, with its assault of stimulation and its demand for constant availability, becomes almost unbearable for your newly sensitized system. The notifications that ping from your devices feel like tiny electric shocks. The news, with its endless parade of crisis and conflict, penetrates your awareness with an intensity that leaves you feeling personally responsible for sufferings you cannot alleviate. The casual violence in entertainment, the subtle aggression in advertising, the manufactured urgency of consumer culture, all of this begins to feel like an attack on something precious and vulnerable that is trying to emerge within you. You may find yourself retreating to spaces of natural beauty, where the sensitivity that feels like a curse in human environments reveals itself as a profound gift. The whisper of wind through leaves becomes a language you understand. The play of light on water speaks directly to your soul, without need for translation. The silence of forests and the vastness of skies offer the kind of nourishment that your hypersensitive system craves. Subtle, authentic, aligned with rhythms older than human civilization. This sacred wounding makes you a prophet of subtle truths that others cannot yet perceive. You sense the approaching storms in relationships before the first clouds gather. You feel the shifts in collective consciousness, like changes in atmospheric pressure. You become aware of the spiritual drought that underlies much of modern life, sensing the deep thirst that drives people to consume experiences and acquire possessions in a futile attempt to satisfy a hunger that can only be fed from within. The sensitivity extends beyond the emotional into the realm of meaning itself. Words carry more weight than they used to. Casual lies feel heavy in the air. Authentic expressions of truth resonate in your chest like struck bells. You find yourself unable to participate in conversations that feel empty or false, not from any moral superiority, but from a kind of allergic reaction to inauthenticity. Your system has become so finely tuned to truth that anything else feels like poison. This heightened sensitivity may be misunderstood by others as fragility or overreaction, but you are learning to recognize it as a form of spiritual armor, not the kind that protects by blocking, but the kind that protects by feeling everything so deeply that nothing can truly harm the essential core of who you are. The raw exposure teaches you to distinguish between what is yours and what belongs to others, between the pain that teaches and the suffering that merely distracts. Sleep becomes both refuge and revelation as your dreams grow more vivid and meaningful, carrying messages from the depths of the unconscious that your newly sensitized awareness can finally receive and interpret. The boundary between waking and sleeping consciousness becomes more fluid, allowing for forms of knowing that bypass the rational mind's insistence on logical sequence and causal relationship. In quiet moments, you begin to understand that this sacred wound of sensitivity is preparing you for a kind of perception that the world desperately needs, the ability to feel the true condition of things beneath their surface appearances, to sense the spiritual health or sickness of situations and relationships, to navigate by inner compass when all external reference points have been stripped away. You are becoming a tuning fork for authenticity, a barometer for truth a sensitive instrument capable of detecting the subtle energies that move beneath the surface of ordinary reality. The wound is not a weakness, but a doorway, an opening through which deeper forms of knowing can finally enter your conscious awareness. The world has become too much because you are becoming capable of perceiving how much there really is. In the democracy of sleep, where consciousness surrenders its careful control and allows the deeper currents of the psyche to speak their ancient truths, you discover that your inner world has become more vivid than the waking realm you once considered reality. The dreams that visit you now arrive not as random neural firings, but as messengers from territories your rational mind has never explored. Landscapes painted in symbols older than language, populated by figures who know your name, though you have never met them in the daylight world. You wake from these nocturnal journeys with the taste of eternity still on your tongue, carrying fragments of wisdom that your conscious mind struggles to translate into the poverty of ordinary words. The dream images linger throughout your day, like perfume in an empty room, a golden key that opened no door you can remember, a conversation with a stranger who spoke truths you needed to hear, a landscape that felt more like home than any place you have ever lived. Jung understood these dreams as communications from the self, that deeper center of being that orchestrates the symphony of individuation, even when the conscious ego cannot hear the music. The unconscious rises like floodwaters during this phase of awakening, not to drown you, but to baptize you in the symbolic language that is your soul's native tongue. You become fluent in metaphor, conversant with archetype, a citizen of both the world of surfaces and the world of depths. The dreams that come during lonely awakening are different from the dreams of ordinary sleep. They carry the weight of revelation, the authority of vision, the unmistakable signature of messages that originate from beyond the boundaries of personal memory. You may find yourself dreaming of places you have never been, but recognize with the certainty of déjà vu. You encounter dream figures who offer guidance with the wisdom of ages, speaking to you in voices that sound like your own deepest knowing. These are not mere dreams, but initiations, invitations into the mystery school of your own becoming, where the curriculum is written in symbols and the lessons are delivered through experience rather than explanation. You dream of descending into underground chambers where ancient treasures wait to be discovered. You find yourself climbing mountains that exist nowhere on earthly maps, but whose peaks offer vistas of your own potential. You wade through rivers that flow not with water, but with liquid light, each step forward a movement deeper into the territory of authentic selfhood. The boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness begins to blur in ways that would have frightened your former self, but now feel like a natural expansion of awareness. You carry dream wisdom into your waking hours, finding that the insights received in sleep illuminate the puzzles of your daylight existence. The symbolic language of dreams begins to appear in your waking world through synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, and encounters that feel orchestrated by the same intelligence that choreographs your nocturnal visions. You may dream of animals that serve as guides and teachers, the wise owl that offers the gift of seeing in darkness, the serpent that demonstrates the necessity of shedding old skins, the butterfly that models the transformation you are undergoing. These dream creatures carry messages from the instinctual wisdom that civilization has taught you to ignore, reminding you that you are not separate from the natural world, but an expression of its deepest intelligence. The dreams of lonely awakening often feature encounters with shadow figures, the parts of yourself that you have rejected or denied, now appearing in dream form to demand recognition and integration. These shadow encounters are not nightmares but opportunities for wholeness, invitations to reclaim the disowned aspects of your personality that must be acknowledged before true individuation can occur. You dream of reconciling with enemies who turn out to be allies, of embracing the very qualities you once feared or despised, of discovering that what you judged as weakness contains unexpected strength. Sometimes the dreams come as memories of lives you have never lived, carrying the emotional resonance of personal experience, but set in times and places that belong to history rather than biography. These dreams feel like visitations from the collective unconscious, that vast repository of human experience that Jung recognized as the inheritance of every individual soul. You wake from these dreams with the strange sense of having lived multiple lifetimes in a single night, carrying forward ancient wisdoms that inform your present circumstances in ways you cannot fully explain. The dream world becomes your night school, where you study subjects that have no names in daylight curricula. You learn the geography of the soul, the physics of transformation, the chemistry of consciousness. You discover that sleep is not rest but work, the deep work of integration that can only happen when the ego steps aside and allows the deeper self to orchestrate the process of becoming. Your waking relationships begin to feel less real than your dream encounters. The conversations you have with dream figures carry more weight than the small talk of daily interaction. The emotions you experience in dreams feel more authentic than the manufactured feelings of social performance. You find yourself looking forward to sleep not as escape, but as homecoming, a return to the realm where your truest self is free to emerge without the constraints of social expectation or rational limitation. This is the education of the soul through the ancient curriculum of symbol and archetype, myth and metaphor. The unconscious rises like a teacher who has waited patiently for the student to become ready for advanced instruction. The dreams that speak while others sleep are preparing you for a kind of consciousness that can navigate both worlds, the world of appearances and the world of essence, the realm of facts and the realm of truth. You are learning to read the symbolic script of your own becoming literate in the language that your deepest self has always spoken, but which your rational mind is only now beginning to understand. The dreams are not interruptions of reality, but revelations of a reality deeper than the one you're waking. Consciousness has been trained to perceive. In sleep, you remember who you really are. In dreams, you rehearse who you are becoming. The questions arrive like uninvited guests who refuse to leave, taking up residence in the rooms of your consciousness with the persistent presence of truth that can no longer be ignored. They rise from depths you never knew existed within you, bubbling up through the carefully constructed floors of certainty that once made your world feel solid and safe. Who am I emerges not as philosophical curiosity, but as urgent necessity, a coal of fire burning in your chest that demands attention even when attention brings no relief. These are not the questions of academic inquiry with their neat boundaries and expected answers, but the questions that emerge from the depths of existence itself, raw, immediate, and impossible to satisfy, with the ready-made responses that once seemed adequate. They carry the weight of genuine mystery, the authority of absolute necessity, the terrible beauty of problems that can only be lived rather than solved. What is the point of all this? Becomes more than a moment of existential doubt. It becomes the central inquiry around which your entire life begins to reorganize itself. The activities that once seemed meaningful now feel like elaborate distractions from this burning question. The goals that once motivated you now appear as detours from the only journey that truly matters, the journey into the heart of your own mystery. Jung recognized these questions as the voice of the self, breaking through the comfortable assumptions of the ego, demanding that consciousness expand to accommodate truths too large for the rational mind to contain. The questions that arise during lonely awakening are not problems to be solved, but koans to be lived, paradoxes that transform the questioner in the very act of being deeply engaged. Why do I feel so alone even when surrounded by people? This question burns with particular intensity during the awakening process, pointing toward the fundamental solitude that exists at the core of every individual soul. You discover that the loneliness you feel is not a problem to be fixed, but a doorway to be entered, the gateway to authentic selfhood that can only be discovered in the territory that belongs to you alone. The question, what am I supposed to do with my life, evolves from career planning into spiritual emergency. The answer cannot be found in external sources, not in the expectations of family, not in the demands of society, not in the models provided by others who seem to have figured it all out. The question demands that you descend into the depths of your own being to discover purposes that cannot be assigned from outside, but must be excavated from within like precious metals mined from the earth of the soul. Why does everything feel so meaningless? This question strips away the comfortable fictions that most people use to construct purpose, revealing the existential void that lies beneath all human activity. But this void is not emptiness, it is pregnant space, the fertile darkness from which authentic meaning can finally emerge. You learn that manufactured meaning feels hollow precisely because your soul has glimpsed the possibility of meaning that arises naturally from alignment with your deepest nature. The questions multiply like cells dividing, each one giving birth to others. What is real? How do I know what I know? Why do I exist? What happens when I die? Is there something more than this physical reality? These inquiries cannot be Googled or resolved through consultation with experts. They require a kind of inner archaeology, a careful excavation of truths that have been buried beneath layers of cultural conditioning and psychological defense. You may find yourself obsessed with questions that have no practical application but feel more urgent than any practical concern. What is consciousness becomes more compelling than how do I advance my career? Who was I before I was born? Feels more relevant than what should I have for dinner? The questions that arise from the depths carry their own authority, their own sense of cosmic importance that makes ordinary concerns seem trivial by comparison. These questions are not signs of mental instability, but symptoms of spiritual maturity, evidence that your consciousness has evolved beyond the simple certainties that satisfy those who have not yet begun the journey of individuation. The questions burn because they are real questions, arising from direct contact with the mystery of existence rather than from intellectual curiosity or academic requirement. The burning quality of these questions is important. They are not cool intellectual puzzles, but hot coals that cannot be set aside or ignored. They generate heat that transforms the one who carries them, like alchemical fire that burns away the dross of false identity to reveal the gold of authentic selfhood beneath. The discomfort they cause is the discomfort of growth, the pain of consciousness expanding beyond its former boundaries. You may try to escape these questions through busyness, entertainment, or the company of others, but they wait patiently for your return, faithful as shadows. They have taken up permanent residence in your awareness because they represent the agenda of your own soul, the curriculum of your individuated education, the syllabus of your becoming. In quiet moments, you begin to understand that these questions are not problems to be solved, but mysteries to be lived. They are not obstacles to your happiness, but invitations to a deeper form of fulfillment that can only be discovered through direct engagement with the unknown. The questions themselves become teachers, guides that lead you deeper into the territory of your own authenticity. The old answers that once satisfied now feel like clothes that no longer fit. Not wrong, necessarily, but inadequate to contain the expanding dimensions of your understanding. You stand naked before the great questions, stripped of borrowed certainties, forced to discover what you actually believe rather than what you have been taught to believe. These questions that have no answers are actually questions that can only be answered by the living of your life, by the choices you make, by the person you become in response to their persistent inquiry. They burn not to torment you, but to illuminate the path that only you can walk, the path that leads from who you thought you were to who you actually are. Something wild and untamed stirs in the depths of your being, a creative force as ancient as the first human who looked at cave walls and felt compelled to make marks, as primal as the impulse that drives birds to sing at dawn and flowers to burst from frozen ground. This is not the tame creativity of hobbies or the manageable inspiration of weekend projects, but something far more dangerous and essential, the daemon awakening, demanding expression with the urgency of birth itself. You feel pregnant with possibilities that have no names yet, swollen with visions that cannot be captured in any medium you have ever learned to use. The creative fire burns in your chest like a caged phoenix, beating its wings against the ribs of your conventional existence, demanding release into forms that do not yet exist. This is the divine discontent that Socrates knew, the demon that whispers truths the rational mind cannot grasp, the inner God that insists on incarnation through the unique vessel of your individual expression. The wildness of this creative awakening refuses to be channeled into the acceptable outlets that once satisfied your need for self-expression. The painting class feels too structured, the writing workshop too formulaic, the dance lessons too choreographed for the untamed movement that wants to emerge through you. What stirs within you is not a skill to be learned, but a force to be unleashed. Not a talent to be developed, but a calling to be answered with your entire being. You may find yourself drawn to materials and mediums you have never worked with before, your hands moving with an intelligence that seems to bypass conscious intention. You write words that surprise you with their wisdom, create images that emerge from depths you didn't know you contained, compose melodies that sound like songs your soul has been humming for lifetimes. The creative force uses you as its instrument, playing through you music that belongs to no tradition you can name. This is the creative demon that Jung understood as one of the most powerful manifestations of the individuating self, the divine spark within that demands unique expression through the unrepeatable instrument of your particular consciousness. It cares nothing for technique or tradition, market demands or social acceptance. It seeks only authenticity, only the pure expression of what has never been expressed before because no one else has ever been exactly who you are. The demon awakening may manifest as an overwhelming urge to write, not stories or poems necessarily, but words that capture the ineffable experiences moving through you like weather systems in the climate of consciousness. You find yourself filling journals with thoughts that feel too precious to share, too fragile to expose to the harsh light of external judgment. These words are not meant for publication but for incarnation, the necessary act of giving form to the formless insights arising from your depths. Or the creative fire may express itself through movement, not the learned steps of formal dance, but the spontaneous choreography of a body finally free to express what the mind cannot articulate. You find yourself moving in ways that feel like prayer, like ritual, like the physical manifestation of energies that have been trapped too long in the confines of acceptable behavior. Your body becomes a brush painting emotions across the canvas of space. The visual arts may call to you with new urgency, demanding that you translate inner landscapes into external form. You see colors that don't exist in nature, imagine textures that speak of psychological states, envision compositions that capture the geometry of transformation itself. The canvas becomes a mirror for the soul, each brushstroke a word in the language of becoming that only you can speak. Music may flow through you like water finding its natural course, melodies that seem to remember themselves rather than being composed, harmonies that capture the sound of consciousness awakening to itself. You find yourself humming songs that no one has written, tapping rhythms that seem to echo the heartbeat of the universe itself. The demon speaks in frequencies that bypass the rational mind and go directly to the soul. But perhaps most importantly, you begin to understand that your life itself is the canvas. Your choices, the brushstrokes, your relationships, the colors with which you are painting the masterpiece of your authentic existence. The creative fire demands not just artistic expression, but existential artistry, the courage to live as a work of art in progress, to make of your daily existence a creative act worthy of the divine spark that animates it. The wildness of this creative awakening frightens the parts of you that have learned to stay within acceptable boundaries. The demon cares nothing for your fears, your practical concerns, your need for security and approval. It demands that you become a channel for forces larger than your personal will, a vessel through which the universe can know itself in ways that have never been possible before your unique arrival on the scene. This creative fire burns away the false modesty that once convinced you that you had nothing special to offer the world. It reveals the terrible and wonderful truth that you are not just a consumer of culture, but a creator of it, not just a member of the audience, but a performer on the stage of existence, not just a reader of the great book of life, but one of its authors. The demon awakening is both gift and responsibility, the gift of direct connection to the creative source of all existence, and the responsibility to serve as a faithful translator of the visions that arise from depths beyond personal understanding. You are being asked to become an artist of being itself, a creative force in service to the endless creativity of consciousness, exploring its own infinite possibilities through the unique lens of who you are. The wildness cannot be tamed, only served. The creative fire cannot be controlled, only channeled. The demon cannot be silenced, only honored through the courage to give it form in a world hungry for authentic expression. You are pregnant with possibilities that belong not just to you, but to the world that awaits their birth through your willingness to become the vessel through which the unborn can finally incarnate. In the deepest chamber of this lonely awakening, you encounter a darkness so complete that it seems to swallow not just light, but hope itself. A void so profound that even the spiritual consolations you have clung to dissolve like sugar in rain. This is the dark night that mystics throughout the ages have mapped in trembling words, the necessary descent into the underworld of the psyche where all false comforts must be surrendered before authentic rebirth can begin. Here, in this sacred darkness, even the idea of awakening feels like a cruel joke your mind has played on itself. The spiritual concepts that once provided meaning now taste like ash in your mouth. The books that promised enlightenment mock you from their shelves with their confident assertions about transformation and growth. The very notion that your suffering has purpose feels like the most elaborate delusion of all, a story you told yourself to avoid facing the stark reality of meaningless existence. This is not depression in the clinical sense, though it may feel indistinguishable from it. This is the dark night of the soul that St. John of the Cross described, a spiritual condition where the ego's last desperate attempts to maintain control through meaning-making are stripped away, leaving consciousness naked before the void that exists at the center of all human experience. You have been brought to the place where all maps fail, where all guides fall silent, where even the compass of intuition spins wildly without finding magnetic north. The darkness here is not empty but pregnant, gravid with possibilities too vast for the rational mind to comprehend. Yet in the midst of this ultimate unknowing, the darkness feels like abandonment by everything you once trusted. Your sense of purpose, your faith in growth, your belief in the essential goodness of existence. You sit in the ruins of your former spiritual certainties like a survivor in the aftermath of an earthquake that has leveled every structure you used for shelter. Jung understood this phase as the nigredo, the necessary blackening that precedes authentic transformation, the composting of old identity that must occur before new growth can emerge. But understanding it intellectually provides no comfort when you are actually living through it. The knowledge that this darkness serves a purpose feels like a thin consolation when you are drowning in the void of your own questioning. In this deepest phase, you may find that even solitude, your faithful companion through the earlier stages of awakening, offers no refuge. The silence that once felt nurturing now feels oppressive, filled with the echoes of questions that have no answers, and populated by thoughts that circle like vultures around the carcass of your former beliefs. The inner landscape that once seemed rich with possibility now appears as barren as a lunar surface, devoid of the spiritual atmosphere that once sustained life. The void reveals itself as the truth that was always hiding beneath every human construction of meaning, the stark recognition that we are biological organisms spinning on a rock through empty space, that consciousness itself may be nothing more than an accident of chemistry, that all our searching and seeking and growing may be elaborate ways of avoiding the fundamental absurdity of existence. This is not philosophical nihilism, but experiential confrontation with the possibility that nothing matters in the way we need it to matter. Yet something extraordinary happens in this place of ultimate abandonment, when even the idea of spiritual progress is stripped away, when the very notion of transformation feels like self-deception, when you sit naked in the darkness without even the comfort of believing that darkness serves light. In this moment of complete surrender, something deeper than belief begins to stir. Not hope, for hope still carries the ego's agenda for improvement. Not faith, for faith still implies a bridge between where you are and where you want to be. But something more fundamental, the simple fact of existence itself, the bare awareness that remains even when all contents of consciousness have been evacuated. In the void, you discover that emptiness itself can become a womb. The absence of all familiar landmarks forces you to navigate by a different kind of knowing, not the knowing of the mind, but the knowing of being itself. You learn to sit with mystery not as a problem to be solved, but as the fundamental condition of existence that can be embraced without understanding, lived without explanation, trusted without proof. This is the dark night's secret teaching, that authentic spiritual life begins not with the acquisition of special knowledge or experiences, but with the complete acceptance of not knowing, not as a temporary state to be transcended, but as the permanent condition of human consciousness. The void becomes not an obstacle to overcome, but the ground of being itself, the fertile darkness from which all manifestation emerges and to which all forms eventually return. The darkness strips away every consolation except the most fundamental one, the fact that you exist to experience even this darkness, that consciousness persists even in the absence of all content, that being continues even when all meanings have been exhausted. In the heart of the void, you encounter what cannot be taken away, not because it is strong, but because it is so basic that it cannot be distinguished from the very capacity to experience anything at all. When you have lost everything else, purpose, meaning, spiritual comfort, the very belief in the validity of spiritual seeking, what remains is the naked fact of awareness itself, prior to all content, more fundamental than all experience, as intimate as breathing and as mysterious as the space between thoughts. This is the gift the dark night offers, not enlightenment, but the recognition that you never needed enlightenment, not transformation, but the understanding that you were never broken, not meaning, but the discovery that existence itself is already complete without the stories consciousness tells about itself. In embracing the void, you discover that emptiness is not the opposite of fullness, but its ground, the pregnant darkness from which all possibility emerges, the womb of being itself. In the alchemy of acceptance, lead transforms to gold, not through force, but through the patient art of befriending what once seemed like enemy territory. The very solitude that felt like exile begins to reveal itself as sanctuary. The loneliness that appeared as punishment, slowly unveiling its true nature as protection for the delicate process of becoming that could not survive in the harsh light of constant social exposure, protection for the tender shoots of authentic selfhood that needed the fertile darkness of aloneness to take root and grow. This transformation does not happen overnight, like a sudden revelation that changes everything in an instant. Instead, it unfolds with the gradual inevitability of seasons changing, each small shift in perception building upon the last, until one day you realize that the quality of your solitude has fundamentally altered. Where once there was resistance, now there is acceptance. Where once there was fear, now there is curiosity. Where once there was the desperate hunger for escape, now there is the profound contentment of being exactly where you need to be. The alchemy begins with the recognition that fighting your solitude is like trying to escape your own shadow, a futile exercise that only exhausts the one attempting it. Every moment spent resisting the necessary loneliness of awakening is energy stolen from the very process that solitude is designed to serve. You begin to understand that the spiritual path requires the same patience that growth in nature demands, the willingness to trust timing that operates on scales larger than personal preference or social expectation. In this phase of transmutation, you start to notice the subtle gifts that solitude has been offering all along, gifts that were invisible while you were focused on what it seemed to be taking away, the gift of hearing your own thoughts without the constant static of external input, the gift of feeling your own emotions without the pressure to modulate them for others' comfort, the gift of discovering preferences and desires that belong entirely to you, uninfluenced by the gravitational pull of others' expectations. Jung understood this acceptance as the integration of what was once rejected, the shadow work of acknowledging that the very qualities we resist often contain the seeds of our greatest strengths. The loneliness that felt like failure becomes the solitude that enables success. The isolation that seemed like abandonment reveals itself as the chosen path of the mystic, the artist, the authentic individual who must separate from the collective to discover what they uniquely have to offer. The chrysalis metaphor becomes lived reality as you begin to appreciate the protective function of your current cocoon. You understand now why this phase of development requires enclosure, why the butterfly cannot emerge until its time in darkness is complete, why rushing the process would result in a creature too weak to survive in the open air of the world. Your solitude is not stagnation, but incubation, the necessary period of internal development that precedes external emergence. In quiet moments, you catch glimpses of the being you are becoming within this chrysalis of aloneness. like sunlight filtering through the walls of your protective enclosure, you sense the qualities that are developing in the privacy of your solitude, qualities that could never have emerged in the constant presence of others, courage that doesn't need witnesses, wisdom that doesn't require validation, love that doesn't depend on being loved in return. These treasures can only be mined in the depths of your own experience, far from the surface world of social performance. The alchemy of acceptance teaches you to distinguish between loneliness and aloneness, two experiences that may look identical from the outside but feel completely different from within. Loneliness is the ego's interpretation of solitude, colored by fear and resistance and the belief that isolation means abandonment. Aloneness is the soul's natural state, complete unto itself, connected to the source of all connection, whole without need for completion from external sources. You begin to develop what might be called a practice of solitude, not the avoidance of others but the conscious cultivation of your relationship with your own being. This practice might include meditation, journaling, long walks in nature, or simply sitting in stillness with whatever arises in the spaciousness of your own awareness. You discover that solitude, like any relationship, deepens with attention and care, revealing new dimensions of richness the more fully you engage with it. The transformation deepens as you realize that your capacity for authentic connection with others has actually increased through your willingness to be genuinely alone. When you are comfortable in your own company, you can meet others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, offering presence rather than seeking it, giving love rather than hunting for it. The paradox reveals itself. The more completely you can be alone, the more truly you can be with others. You start to understand that what you once experienced as the punishment of isolation was actually the gift of individuation, the necessary separation from collective consciousness that allows for the emergence of genuine selfhood. The chrysalis begins to feel less like a prison and more like a sacred space, less like exile and more like pilgrimage to the holy ground of your own authentic being. In this phase of alchemical transformation, you may find yourself actually choosing solitude over social engagement, not from fear or avoidance, but from a genuine preference for the quality of consciousness that emerges in aloneness. The activities that once felt mandatory, the social obligations, the networking events, the gatherings that drained more energy than they provided, now seem optional, and you exercise your newfound freedom to decline what doesn't serve your becoming. The gold that emerges from this alchemical process is not the gleaming metal of external achievement, but the subtle radiance of inner completion. You discover that you carry within yourself everything you once sought from others: companionship, understanding, love, validation, purpose, not as consolation prizes for what you cannot have, but as the genuine treasures that were always there, waiting to be discovered in the silence between your thoughts, in the space between your heartbeats, in the eternal now of your own conscious presence. The loneliness transmutes into what the mystics have called the solitude of the self, not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence, not isolation but union with the ground of being itself. You have learned the sacred art of being alone without being lonely, of finding in solitude not what you lack but what you are.